Hey everyone, I'm Angie Miller, the host of Strong Mind, Strong Body, and I have a question for you. What if mental chaos could actually lead to mental mastery? So, in my upcoming episode, I am joined by Todd Hagopian. He is an entrepreneur who turned a bipolar disorder or a bipolar diagnosis into a business advantage. So, together, we are going to take a personal look at neurodivergence in the workplace and how self sabotage, success, and self awareness intersect, and how mental health concerns can actually propel us instead of holding us back. So, when you're finished watching or listening to the episode, I hope you will like, follow, and subscribe, and please leave a 5-star review. I'll see you in the show. Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller. And today in this episode, I'm joined by Todd Hagopian. He is an entrepreneur who turned a bipolar diagnosis into a business advantage. Basically, he wants to talk about, or he's here to talk about how we can turn mental chaos into mental mastery. We're going to look closely at what neurodivergence looks like in the workplace, essentially how self-sabotage, success, and self-awareness intersect, and how mental health concerns can actually propel us forward instead of holding us back. So this is an up close and personal look at what it looks like to look at mental health from the inside in conjunction with workplace, because this is something that we don't always talk about. And I really appreciate that Todd is here to talk about it and to share his insights. So Todd, I'm going to bring you in. How are you doing?
Very good, Angie. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's so good to have you here. It really is. So, Todd, in the spirit of like the mental chaos to the mental mastery, first of all, before we even start though, give everyone a little bit of an idea of what you do.
Sure. So I'm a business turnaround executive. What that looks like is a business is in trouble and they kind of pick me up, drop me in, and you got about 24 months to fix the business. That usually looks like very aggressive changes and focused on profit and really trying to save all the jobs and get the business back up and running in a healthy manner.
Yeah, so a super non-stressful job is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing, right?
yeah, super, super
I mean, no
non-stressful.
stakes at all. Just
No.
come in and take it from 2 million to 20 million.
Yep.
You've got a year.
Yep, that's basically it. Yeah, usually you get two.
Yeah. Okay. So, how did your journey with neurodivergence begin? Like, what led to your mental health diagnosis?
Yeah, so I went about 15 or so years undiagnosed. We're not really sure. Probably became bipolar in college at some point in time, which is when that happens a lot. But it's definitely when I start thinking back to the first signs. But I didn't know that. In college, you play hard, work hard. You're drinking a lot, you're not sleeping a lot. None of that seemed weird to me. And so I was just I was out on my own for the first time. I was doing things, didn't realize, that I would be up drinking till 3 a.m. The guy next to me might sleep until 2. The next day I'll be back up at 5:30 and start working. You know what I mean? And so for years and years, I kind of went up in business and got promoted and just kept sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. You know what I mean? And had kind of the ups and downs of bipolar. Never occurred to me that something was that wrong. I always knew something was wrong in the background, just didn't know what. And I had this kind of cycle of, big accomplishment and then self-sabotage, and just kind of felt like a work hard, play hard thing. About 15 years into it, finally some stuff happened, and I finally had to get diagnosed, and I can go through that with you, but that's essentially the path that led there.
Well, and it's interesting because like you said in college, it's that lived experience for a lot of people where like you said, you work hard, play hard, you go out, you party, you do things maybe that you wouldn't do later in life just because it's maybe in the spirit of the college thing that people go through. But then you get out into the real world, if you will. And I can see where when you're talking about what I hear you say is like those manic episodes where you can go and go and go and go and go. You didn't think anything about it. But then what about that self-sabotage? Because what was the self-sabotage
Yeah.
that made you go, oh, okay, this might be a thing?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I wish I could say that I learned from the self-sabotage, but I didn't. What would happen is I would go and go and go and go, and I would hit something great, and then kind of like relax for a second, and everything would come rushing in, and you'd get that bipolar depression that I didn't really know what it was at the time, and I would do something bad, right? So, got arrested a couple times for drinking and driving, or just drinking, and it would be like, man, I just closed the biggest deal in my life, and then within 24 hours, I'm arrested and having to deal with that at work and trying to get through that and stay on the upward path, while dealing with all these legal issues. And when I got married, I started to be like, okay, this is, I got too much going on. I can't do this anymore. So then I decided it was brilliant to just drink alone at night when nobody was around. You know what I mean? And so that didn't get any better. It just kind of made it even worse. I slept even less. My wife didn't even know. She had no idea how little I was sleeping or what I was going through. And then finally, I got to about 35 and I started having chest pains and I was having a migraine that I couldn't kick and barely could see. And went to the doctor and they threw everything at it. Tried to look for heart attack and stroke and like what's going on with this kid. And finally somebody asked, they had talked to me about some whatever, and they go, have you ever talked to a psychiatrist? And I was like, why would I, like, how could that possibly be all these physical symptoms? So I ended up going in, and then pretty quickly they were like, yeah, you're really bipolar. You're really bipolar. And then I went to another one and he confirmed it. And so that's how it ended up getting diagnosed, was they were looking for all these physical symptoms and what's causing it. And it turned out it was basically just all being, through the no sleeping that I could get away with when I was 25. But when I was 35, it was starting to catch up to me. The no sleeping and the heavy drinking was just catching up to me, and the body was not responding positively anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and two, a couple things that I heard in there was that whole thing that we tell ourselves if we do it in private and nobody knows, maybe it didn't really happen kind of thing. Like the late night drinking, doing it in solo, like no one would discover it. And you were, you become such an expert at hiding bad habits, if you will, or things that sabotage us until we're not experts at it, until it catches up with us. But to be in the hospital and to go in there for a migraine and to go in there for physical symptoms and then to be told you're bipolar, that had to have been like, that hits me right here, right in the heart, because I'm thinking, what a scary thing. Not that you would want it to be something physical, but I would imagine that landed pretty hard.
Yeah, and it was actually funny because it didn't land as hard as it should have. So first of all, I was like, no, that can't be right. I'll go and get a second opinion, and then they said yes, and then I started listening to them, and you know how you do that thing where you hear only the parts you want to hear, right? So they're describing the hypomania of bipolar, which is what gives you the hyper focus and being able to bounce from thing to thing to thing and set big goals and hit them and work 22 hours a day. And I was like, yeah, that's me. This is great. Like, now I know why I can do it. This is fantastic, and then they talk about the depression and I'm kind of like, I could see how that would drive some of this activity. But now that I know it, and they go, these pills, they had Depakote at the time. They said this Depakote will help your headaches and it'll help your bipolar. And I said, great, give me the headache dose. Like, I'll handle the bipolar. Just get rid of this headache so that I can work 22 hours a day again, which is like not the purpose of getting better. You know what I mean? And that worked for a handful of months. And then, of course, I hit the wall again and finally was like, okay, now I need to quit drinking. I need to get on the right dosage, if not more, and really manage this disorder. And so that's when so it wasn't even like the arrest didn't get me, the diagnosis didn't get me. It was like thinking that I knew how to handle the diagnosis myself and then failing at it. That's when it finally clicked that it was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a lifelong deal, and this is going to change a lot of things for me.
Yeah, almost that grandiosity that comes with, like you said, you kind of hung on to
Yeah.
the manic part. Oh my gosh, good. I can continue to be productive. I mean, this is what I'm known for is my productivity. Give me that Depakote. Just get rid of this stupid headache
Yeah.
kind of thing. Until you're like, no, it doesn't work like that. You also have to treat the depression. And so I'm going to go on a limb and assume that when that happened and you then started treating this and you're not manic all the time, now you've got to deal with the Todd that looks in the mirror and says, so wait a minute, if I'm known for productivity and I'm known for being able to turn these businesses around, what am I going to do if I'm not manic? Because I would imagine that that's the part of you that was thriving, right? Or that's what your mind was saying.
That's exactly right. And more than just my mind was saying, like, that was the part of me that I was known for and that was moving me up. I had just gotten a huge promotion. I was the global marketing director at a pretty decent sized company, and I was traveling back and forth to Europe, and I was building a marketing team out there, and all of a sudden this hit, and the medicine worked great. I felt better. People were saying I was more present. I wasn't telling people what was going on, and people were randomly coming up to me and saying that I looked better and seemed better. Um, and and so it was working great. But what happened is I completely lost the competitive edge. So there was no more like suicidal ideation in the morning. You know what I mean? There was no more having to sleep at red lights because I was sleeping through the night. And I was dealing with two things. One, instead of working 22 hours, I was working 14. You know what I mean? So I was inherently less productive. And then two, I had lost all that hypomanic drive. And so even when I was working, I wasn't like hyper focused. I wasn't taking on huge things. All the stuff I had promised during the grandiosity, now I had to deliver in less time and less and less hypomania. And so I really had to look at it and try and figure out how I was going to deal with it. Did I really have to choose between sanity and success? And that's why I started to come up with what we call the hypomanic toolbox, and trying to bottle up how I used to manage into ways that I could systematize and use ongoing in a healthy manner.
Well, and I think that was an interesting parallel that you just said, determining between sanity and success, right? Because to use success was built upon those manic episodes where you could work 22 hours. But I would venture to say, and to all of you listening, this is actually a two-part series where Todd is going to go into his toolbox, but we're going to do that in part two. First, we just kind of want to dissect what does it look like to be neurodivergent in the workplace, and what does that look like to talk about mental health. But to your point, then you had to come up with a system to, if all else, to tell your mind that 14 hours is enough, because really it is. Is productivity really 22 hours, or is productivity 14 hours done well, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like I can real easily say, yeah, I got more done when I was working 22 hours a week, but in reality, I was drunk for 11 or 12 of those hours. Do you know what I mean? So now that I'm sober for 12 or 14 hours, it's, I'm much more productive now, on top of the fact that I taught myself to be more productive and to focus more. And doing that allowed me to become more productive. But to your point on the neurodivergence, like, it was so important for me to learn how to manage that in the workplace, and then also how to mimic some of the good stuff without having to go off my medicine, right? A lot of folks who are bipolar that start to miss the hypomania will go off the medicine in order to kind of get something done. And I did do that on occasion. I'd be like, man, I got to get this thing done this week. I need to work 22 hours a week. I'm off the medicine. That's obviously not the right thing and never led to anything good. You know what I mean? And I really had to teach myself, like, okay, I'm not going off the medicine. So how am I going to hyper focus for the next 5 days and get this thing done? That's a pretty wild, ambitious goal. So.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a concern with bipolar. It's a concern with a lot of conditions, is when you treat through pharmacology, which is often so completely necessary. Pharmacology can change not just the negative effects, but sometimes we find that some of the more positive effects that we are thriving off of are no longer a part of our system. And so then that is one of the reasons people go off of medication, because they start to miss those parts that they somewhat enjoyed, even though they knew they came with a downside. So I'm glad that you brought that up and kind of had to go through that journey of, okay, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to mess with it and go off it, but this is what you learn. Because I do think that that is a great way to mess with the system, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, you're 100%. Like people, and there's two reasons. I know a lot of folks who are bipolar, and there's two reasons they tend to go off their medicine, right? They miss the hypomania, or they don't like the side effects of the medicine, right? I had both. I definitely missed the hypomania. It was certainly affecting me at work in different ways. And then I gained like 30 pounds on the medicine. Now they have better medicines and I'm on a different one, but I gained like 30 pounds on the medicine because at the time that was the type of medicine they gave all the time. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
And so I had to deal with both of those, and neither of those are fun, and either of those at different points in your mind make complete sense to say, I'm just going to stop this. And now that I understand what I'm going through, I can manage it, and that's just not the case. And I mean, some people can, so I don't want to always say like it has to be pharmacology, but there's certainly a place for it, and you have to respect what it's doing for you, and manage it with your doctor rather than try and get creative at home.
Right. And the truth is our mind tells stories. So 100%. We go on a medication, we feel better, and we go,
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need this anymore. I'm good. Everybody says I'm good. And then we forget that what the effect of the actual pharmacology is doing for us. And that maybe if we are dealing with a mental health disorder, going off of it might not be in our best interest. So, a lot of professionals hide their mental health struggles at work for reasons that I think are obvious. I think we don't even need to expound on that, why a lot of people do. But what made you decide to open up about yours, especially being this person who comes in and does these major, major turnarounds? What gave you the courage to kind of come out and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with?
Yeah, it was tough. So, I mean, I went 15 years undiagnosed, and then I went 8 more years diagnosed and quiet, and I turned around 4 more businesses, and I started to get into the rooms, right, as I moved up in the workplace, and I would hear the way people would talk about this stuff. Nobody ever said anything they weren't supposed to say, but it was kind of one of those things where like, that guy had that thing a couple of years back. Like that's kind of how it would be talked about. And what I realized was that diversity was something that the workplace was focusing so much on, and things like gender and race and religion, we all have been versed on it. We've been taught on it. We've been taught to celebrate it in the workplace and make sure that nobody's getting discriminated against. It still happens, but for the most part, like good managers know how to deal with that stuff. The neurodiversity was very, very different. People do not know how to deal with it. Nobody's taught how to deal with it. And then once somebody comes out, it's not like when somebody comes out as LGBTQ and it's celebrated and people are like, oh, we're so proud of you for saying it. When you come out as neurodiverse, a lot of times the very first thing people try and do is fix you, right? How can I help you get over that? You know what I mean? And what I wanted people to realize was that I wouldn't be where I am today without it, because I learned how to do it, in a safe manner by systematizing it. But I learned how to do it. But even before I was diagnosed, I was adding value that you didn't have in the room before that, right? Because I was thinking differently and I had a different, that diverse viewpoint. But with neurodiversity, it's like, no, we need to medicate you back to normal. They're not celebrating the diversity. They're treating the diversity. Do you know what I mean? It's like we don't try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also want to kind of go back for a minute, because I think we know that not everybody celebrates diversity.
Yeah.
Not everybody
That's
celebrates, but by any long stretch, I think we know that to be true. But we also know, to your point, that mental health is something that people look at as, if you have a mental health disorder, you need to be fixed.
Right.
But when you really think about it, Todd, anything in life, you go through a breakup, people say, I'm sorry, or divorce, I'm sorry. Well, sometimes maybe people don't want you to be sorry. Maybe it's the best thing they've ever done for themselves. And so to talk about neurodiversity, to your point, their first thing is probably like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or, "Oh, what can I do?" When you're thinking, "No, I want you to celebrate that my brain thinks differently. I
Mhm.
respond to the world differently, and this means that I have a unique seat at the table." Yes.
Right.
And so that's such a powerful, powerful thing. And going to that, I want to know, how do you define neurodivergence in your experience?
Yeah, in my experience, it is having a brain that literally works differently, right? So there's all kinds of neurodivergence, and there's small and large. ADHD might be able to go get creative about different things. OCD, you might make a great engineer because you focus on the details. Bipolar goes real deep into things with so grandiose goals, and then goes real deep into things and can run down a rabbit hole until they figure out the answer. There's a lot of different things there. Orthodoxy smashing innovation. So certain ones of those lend themselves to innovation, certain ones lend themselves to engineering. But the point isn't to necessarily, celebrate the illness. It's to recognize that there's some value in how their brain thinks. And so when you're looking for innovation, maybe you go to that guy and you sit them down in a room and you do a big brainstorming session. When you need a detail oriented project, maybe you put the OCD person in charge of that project so that they can thrive in a scenario where they're, focused on hitting every button along the way.
Yeah, well, and that actually taps into something else I kind of wanted to ask is, how do then employers and the people around you, and that's perfect. You look at the way that people function and the way that their brain processes, and you see it as an opportunity, again, that their voice is different. This is a different seat at the table. This divergence in the way that they think, this way that their brain processes adds so much. Adds such kind of a robust shift in the way that we look at the way that we do business. So, but saying that is great. And we understand that. And it sounds like you got the people at work to understand that. But what do you think still persists, misconception wise, in our workspace about mental health, neurodivergence?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that still persists, and part of it is self-sabotaged on us, the folks who are neurodivergent, and so I want to be clear on that too, because I think there are ways to handle it in the workplace, and there are ways that you shouldn't. And part of it is if you always bring up your mental health as either a crutch or an excuse, that's how people are going to look at it. Right. So if every time I do something bad at work, or every time I need help is the only time I'm talking about mental illness, then people are going to associate the bipolar with something that I did wrong, or a accommodation that I'm asking for. Right
Can I
now.
pause you right there?
Yes.
Because I love what you just said, and I hope everyone caught that. That is so powerful. If the only time you bring up your mental health diagnosis is when you've messed up or mucked up, so it looks like you're using it as an excuse, that is exactly what people are going to associate with it. So to your point, you sort of said, if you're bringing it on yourself, right? Did I get that right? I mean,
100%. And I'm careful to say that because I've gotten myself into trouble on different podcasts about that. But I strongly believe it. And I do counsel people younger, because the younger generations, right, 50% of the Gen Z, they think that, or they associate themselves with some form of neurodivergency, right? In my generation, that thing's like 5%, right? None of us talk about it, even if we have it, kind of thing. And so you have to remember that your bosses are my generation or older, and you guys are coming into the workforce as somebody who kind of is okay talking about your neurodivergence. But if every time you talk about autism, it's asking for an accommodation, or it's, I'm sorry I said that, it was rude, I'm autistic, like that's not how you want to bring it up. You want to bring it up when it is a benefit. Like somebody will say, how did you think of that? How did you come up with that thing that drove that improvement? And I was like, well, my bipolar, lends itself to grandiosity. And so when I think of things, I start with the big goal, and then I try and figure out how to get there. And so now all of a sudden it's a benefit, right? It wouldn't have happened if not for the bipolar, not despite having bipolar. It's because of the bipolar. And that's how you have to talk about these things. And that's how I've trained myself to make sure I talk about it. Like, and people will be like, oh, that one time he blew up and this and that, it might have been because of the bipolar. I'm like, no, that's just because I can be a jerk sometimes, right? Like I on purpose, even when there's something that I could blame on the bipolar, I make sure I don't, because
Well,
I
and
don't want
Todd,
it associated,
for the purposes of peace and sort of, you know, middle of the road here, what if we just said that it can go both ways?
It can,
There are times that having a mental health diagnosis, we can say this is a limitation for me,
for
and
sure.
we can own our limitations, and
Mhm.
we can say that in an authentic way. And as long as we balance that with, and this is a strength.
Yeah.
And so I think that that could be, whether it's mental health or whatever it is, we
Mhm.
all are going to have we are all are going to have limitations, or we're all
Sure.
going to have strengths. So I
Sure.
think what I hear you really say is it can be both. It's not binary. It
Yep.
can be your mental health does give you limitations and it does give you strengths. Just
Sure.
like for all of us, that's what our general persona is, right? We all
100%.
have limitations and strengths.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you couch it as a strength, the majority of the time, when you do ask for an accommodation, nobody's going to hang that around your head. You know what I mean? Like A, they're going to give it to you because they should, but B, it's not going to be like that's the thing they think about, all the time. It's going to be like, oh, okay, he was doing great, and then you know what he said? Occasionally, I'm going to need to work from home, like this and that. Okay, we give him the accommodation. He's still doing great, and so you have to just think about that balance of how you're talking about it, how you're communicating it, and how the outside world is seeing the benefit. People don't think about you as much as you think they think about you, right? So they're not spending a whole lot of time thinking about who Angie is.
Wait, what? No.
Yeah, and so you have to remember they're only remembering you this much of the time. And if every time you make them memorable, it's because something bad, then that's what they're going to remember. So you just got to think about that when you're talking about your own diagnosis.
Yeah. Or your own strengths and
Yeah.
limitations. So
Mhm.
do you think that your self-awareness and you disclosing what you're dealing with at work, do you think that it helped you find stability?
Yeah, I do because you don't have to hide things anymore. And you have more people looking out for you. Sometimes with these diagnoses, I mean, bipolar, has a high depression rate, a high suicide rate. Like you want people to be understanding that if you don't seem right, you know, you should probably say something. Like it's not good that for 8 years I had nobody at work or very few people at work who had any idea that there was anything wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like that could have been a bad situation. Now I had a good support system I built at home and in my friends, you know what I mean? But even my family, like parents had no idea for 8 years. Like that's not the best situation. It's much better if somebody occasionally is like, "Hey, you seem a little different. You okay?" Like I respect that completely when people ask me that now, but that didn't happen for 8 years, and frankly, I had some bad weeks in those 8 years that probably wouldn't have been as bad had I been open. So right now, I'm feeling probably about as good as I have my entire career.
It's interesting that you say that because I think there's so much, I'll just say darkness that we all hold inside that we are so
Mm.
fearful of sharing. We all carry so many secrets because we just assume that if the world knew, either A, we'd have to take on their stuff,
Mhm.
right? Like, because people don't know how sometimes to deal with
Yeah.
stuff. And the next thing you know, you're consoling them
Yep.
and you're like,
Mhm.
whoa, wait a minute. That's not what I wanted to do here. But it's really hard to hold a secret. It's really, really hard to hold a secret. And it's hard if you've been in a family system where secrets have been revealed and you think, gosh, that person died with a secret. So to your point, I just think that everything is harder when no one knows and you don't have the support that you need and deserve. So Todd, I do have to ask you, for other people who are struggling with mental health, and pretty much heck, a good majority of us struggle with some form of mental health concern. What as far as managing it at work, what truth or what piece of advice or what hope do you want people to hear from you?
Yeah, I think is people, like everybody has their thing, right? So to your point, like you confess what's going on and they immediately give you back their thing. Like everyone's got their thing. Everyone's dealing with something. You're not going to scare people away by telling them what's going on, especially if you do it the right way. And so being courageous enough to talk about it, but talk about it in the way that this is what's good, this is what's bad, these are the accommodations I do need, and these are the things that are normal. Like this has nothing to do with it. So don't freak out every time you see this. Like it allows you the peace to go to work and be yourself and not freak out about it all the time. Because again, even like when I was hiding it, right, I was always like, oh man, somebody's going to think that that's bipolar. No, nobody knows what bipolar even is. Once you tell them, they don't know. You know what I mean? So like you're constantly in fear, and once it's out there, you're not in fear. And you do still have that thing where you can be like, hey, okay, sorry, I need to take a step back. Like I'm not having a good day right now. And then people understand that a little better. Like, instead of you just, calling in sick or going home halfway through the day.
I like that. I like that a lot because I do think that there's so much fear that comes from holding a secret. And a lot of times the fear is simply that what if somebody finds out?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to kind of unwrap all that and go, and what if they do?
Right.
Because it's a lot harder to hold it than it is to talk about it and to give people the opportunity to be educated and provide support.
Yep.
So I love that. I would consider that a message of hope.
Mm-hmm.
So Todd Hagopian, I am so glad you came on, and Todd's coming back for part 2 because we are going to talk about Todd's of his toolbox, if you will, of how he then took bipolar and was able to not just find stability, but to maintain a level of success in a really hard driving business. So this, I think, Todd, your story reminds us that mental health does not have to sabotage success. It can shape it. So I think also what you're really telling people is if your mind works differently, maybe that difference is your advantage. And I think that's a good thing for people to hear. So stay with us for part 2 of this series with Todd. I'm Angie Miller. Thank you so much for joining us on Strong Mind, Strong Body, and we will see you next time.